Chapter 26. The Spider has landed. The lunar module separated from the command module and landed on the moon's surface that Saturday afternoon. We saw a simulation of the landing, but we heard the real thing. The minute the lunar module touched the moon's floor, all of us watching TVs and listening on the broadcast became Earthlings, waiting for the two astronauts and the lunar module to step outside and onto the moon. I had a time getting Vonetta and Fern to stay inside to watch the landing, let alone wait for the two astronauts to climb out and walk on the moon. Vonetta and Fern had become good earlier, watching and listening as the space shuttle orbited around the moon, taking its time to fire off another rocket to land. When the spacecraft finally separated into two ships, one landing and the other one staying up in space, we all cheered. Big Ma and Ma Charles prayed. But that seemed to be all over there was to it. The spacecraft sat on the moon for hours, and Vonetta and Fern wanted to go outside and run around with the chickens before the sun went down. Call us when the Martians come. Martians are on Mars. Call us when the Moonies come. There's no such thing as Moonies. If there's Martians, there's Moonies. Just call us when something happens. Off they ran. The only thing happening was a lot of radioing between Mission Control and the astronauts. Jimmy Trotter took a chance and ran through the pines and over the creek to check on Butter and to get what afternoon milk Sophie was willing to give. He came back by 6 for supper, which Ma Charles was only too glad to have Big Ma heap on his plate. We told him he'd missed the little silver men that came to greet the lunar module, but he pulled out his transistor radio and laughed in our faces. It was long after our bedtime, and still nothing had happened. I didn't have to ask Ma Charles and told Big Ma, let him see it, and Big Ma fussed and went to bed. We cheered our little victory, but Vonetta and Fern had drifted off on our mountain of pillows and sheets spread out on the floor. I glanced at my Timex. If the astronauts planned to climb out of the Eagle, they had to do it soon, or the only thing we'd be seeing at midnight would be the picture on the TV screen of American flag or the Indian chief posted at the end of the broadcast day. I wanted my sisters to see the astronauts on the moon almost as badly as I wanted them to see the Jackson 5 on TV for the first time. I knew they shouldn't miss any moonwalking, but I found myself, like Mr. Lucas and Ma Charles, drifting off to sleep. Around 10:45 that night, Jimmy Trotter poked me in the shoulder. Cousin Dell, it's about to happen. You sure? Any minute. Even Walter Cronkite's voice had that quiet excitement of sportscaster announcing a big deal golf putt. It was about to happen. Jimmy Trotter tugged on Mr. Lucas's sleeve, and Mr. Lucas pretended he'd been awake. He gently nudged Ma Charles, then called out, Ophelia, come on out. Ophelia, come on before you miss it. Big Ma took to hiding in her room when Mr. Lucas stayed to watch the moon mission. Even Big Ma wanted to witness the astronauts walking on the moon. She joined us in the living room, but wouldn't sit in the empty chair next to Mr. Lucas. I tried to get Fern up while Jimmy pulled Vonetta's ear, not hard, but playful, light. I never thought of anyone besides our parents, Fern and once Uncle D, really and truly liking Vonetta. Jimmy Trotter not only liked Vonetta, he adored her. She woke up smiling at him. Fern stretched and opened her eyes. She saw the simulated spacecraft and sleepily sang, the itsy bitsy spider dropped on the yellow moon. Even on the color television screen, the moon wasn't yellow or silver. It was whitish gray and dull. But Fern did get the spider part right. The lunar module looked more like a four-legged spider than an eagle, but I'm sure it would have been the same if the astronaut had said, the spider has landed, when they first touched down on the moon's surface. Finally, we were watching the real thing, the real live broadcast and not a simulation with actors playing the parts of the astronauts. Finally, the words, live from the surface of the moon, showed up fuzzy but readable on the television screen, and we were seeing the real moon. We all cheered. Big Ma said, may God have mercy. And Ma Charles shook her tambourine. The snowy figure of an astronaut in a padded white suit with a bubble helmet and backpack climbed down the ladder of the Eagle in what seemed like slow motion and did what I never thought I'd see. He stepped foot on the moon. The words, man on moon, flashed before our excited and astonished eyes. Big Ma gasped. From the corner of my eye, I saw a motion from Mr. Lucas to Big Ma. He reached over to touch her hand. I didn't look on, but I noticed my grandmother hadn't snatched her hand from Mr. Lucas the way she wiped away kisses and shooed off hugs. The television console speakers crackled. Jimmy Trotter lifted up his hands and asked everyone to be quiet so he could hear Walter Cronkite and the astronauts. Cronkite said, "Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the moon." Jimmy Trotter shouted, "We won the space race!" It wasn't long before gunshots went off in the air from miles away. Two things sprang to mind as I watched one astronaut on the moon and then another astronaut running, hopping, and frolicking on the moon. That there was a third astronaut hovering above in the command module far above the hubbub. While the two below tested their weightlessness, picked up samples of whatever moony-eyed lovers looked up to, and marked up the moon's surface with moon boot tracks, the third astronaut was left behind, holding everything together. The other thing that sprang to mind was that the moon was beautiful at night from a distance, but it surely was a lonely place up close.